First of all, I want to welcome all of you to this session, City, Town, and Country. My name is Eric Ost. I am chairman of Urban Design Associates. I'm also a board member and fellow of the ICAA. The topic today, although we're calling it City, Town, and Country, it's really about growth and about how we're growing here in the United States. It's really interesting to put this really in contrast to what we heard this morning. Whittold gave a very interesting talk about growth here in the city of Charleston. And today we've got three great talks by three urbanists here that are outstanding urbanists, but also incredible people. So I'm actually really pleased to introduce all of them. The one thing, though, that I'll give you a couple of slides of just brief introduction is talking about the scale of the issue that we're talking about when we are talking about growth. So you see there on the right, that number, 1.6 million building permits were issued in 2022. That's not just general building permits, those are for new units. So that, just to give you an idea of the scale of which we're growing. Here in the United States, we're consistently just adding on to the existing cities we have, or we're growing cities that have never been planned in any thoughtful way. The other statistic that I wanted to give you, and by the way, I found these during the pandemic a couple of years ago, and I've been fascinated with them, and this has been something that's been going year over year. The 1.1 to 2% of these communities are, and this new growth are designed by architects. That's according to the National Association of Home Builders. Whether or not that is off by a factor of 10, that is significantly lower than what we need to have happening in the environment. So most people, when they're moving into new communities, they're moving into communities that did not have design as a component to the physical environment of which they're living. And just to put that a little bit in context, I'm very proud to say I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I moved there from the Bay Area in 2004, and I've absolutely fallen in love with the city. It has an incredible wide array of architecture. And just to give you a couple statistics on it, it's a city of 300,000 people. There's 90 neighborhoods and 165 parks. Now, if I were to take a photograph of one of the areas of Pittsburgh and of one of these unique neighborhoods and share that with another Pittsburgher, they know exactly where you were. They know, based on the quality of the architecture, the way in which the street was formed, they know the character of that place. It's grown over many years. So let's talk about that then when we're talking about growth. The 300,000 people, if you were to take 1.6 million homes and multiply that times 3, which is about the average number of people per household, we're talking about over 4 million people are moving into new homes per day. So in annual growth, we need to be developing 15 new Pittsburghs every single year. And we're not talking about in design, we're talking about ribbon cutting. So oftentimes when I do meet people in other industries, it's very interesting when they say, hey, how are you going to, kind of undercut your competition and all that kind of thing. Right now, what we need is more opportunities and more people engaged in the design of the physical environment. We need more firms and more opportunities to get together, to supportive networks like CNU, Urban Guild, and of course the ICAA having opportunities to get together to talk about these issues of growth consistently. So, as I mentioned, we've got three incredible speakers here today talking about the city, town, and country, those three different contexts, areas of which are very much subjective to growth. So our first speaker, or I'm sorry, excuse me, our last speaker will be Stephen James. Stephen is a client and a longtime friend and an outstanding urbanist, but I think I want to mention that something specific about Stephen. Stephen is one of the best designers I've ever met in my entire life. And I would say that he has dedicated his life not to design of actual single buildings or architecture in the way other people are, but he's actually moved into the realm of development and trying to impact these numbers about growth and actually creating better environments for people. So Stephen will be talking about the countryside and a project of which we're very proud of at UDA, working and been honored to work with Stephen. Peter will be talking about the development of towns in the countryside. Peter is Vice President of Belvedere Management and also a developer, but also someone from an architectural background in the concept of town making. And we'll also start with our first presentation. Krupali Krushe, who is Director of Dwarka and Dharma and a professor at University of Notre Dame, will be sharing some of her primary research into how cities are growing and the kind of intensity and development that is happening and understanding their behavior, but then also how are some new ways and how this may inform us in moving forward. So please join me in welcoming Krupali to the podium.
So good morning, everyone. I want to start by briefly explaining something about the reasoning behind how quickly our cities are growing, especially the cities that are located in United States. United States has the fastest expanding cities in the world, even though we do not have the same amount of population growth like many of the countries globally. This is because the present population of United States is at 339 million people. And it has incrementally grown from a time span of 1950s till today in somewhat 0.9 or 0.8%. The largest growth that the city or the population of United States actually had was in 1978 when it was at 1.97%, which is like around 2% of growth. And the population of the country was at 170 million. So we have doubled since that time, since in the last 50 years, the amount of population the United States has. But in comparison to global population, this is nothing. This is very short incremental growth. So what is happening and why are we expanding as quickly as we have? The biggest reasoning that we can see in it is the fact that actually our cities were the densest in 1930s when they originally were created. And slowly over time, we've actually started reducing the density instead of increasing it. How is that happening? And that, that question was bothering me quite a bit. I looked at 1960s, and we all have heard about the history of that time period and what that has done to cities in the United States. But literally, we went down from 25 to 30,000 people per square mile to now going down to 20 and even 10,000. In 2000s, there are places, still are, that show densities around 11 to 12,000 people per square mile. But here's what is going to be shocking for you to see. And this is the part that I'm going to concentrate on. I'm taking the example of the city of Chicago to relate the problem of how expansion of cities in the United States is causing a major loss of growth of forests and loss of land that is provisionally available for agriculture and other important means. And this is a climate concern. So if you look at Chicago, you would say, well, it doesn't suffer any kind of major issues that would impact climate. But the way it is expanding is making a difference in how the city is going to transform ways in which the city can impact climate. So this is 1970s population of actually 3.3 million in Chicago. And it was, even at this time, reducing a city that was shrinking. In 1980s, the population went down 300,000. And in 1990s, it went further 300,000. So every year, we have actually seen a reduction in the city's population that has existed. But look at the map. The areas that are marked in red is the location of urban growth. So even though the city center has been dying, it has been increasing in its nature throughout the site. And the metropolitan area of Chicago has become 9 million people today. So we've gone from the heart of the city to moving outwards in much of suburbia and making that into larger towns and even city areas that are becoming more popular for population growth. What that means is the population density, which was significant, and if you look at certain parts of Chicago, you're going to get 53,000 people. But really, in reality, and this is the parts that you need to look at, the areas marked both in kilometers and in miles, we are at an average of 3,000 to 2,000 people per square mile. That's very low density, very low in comparison to where it originally started as a city. Why is this important? This is important because of the huge impact of heat gain that these large cities are creating throughout the United States. It is also creating large levels of emission because when we talk about the US greenhouse gas emissions, we talk about transportation. And we talk about transportation as if it has nothing to do with the city. The reality is most of the transportation happens because of the amount of time taken for moving from one place to another in the urban area, and the kind of congestion that takes place within these large cities that is causing us to have a large footprint and thus also create larger emissions. This isn't calculated in the same way. It is calculated as if how much emission has been transported by a car or vehicle, but not the amount of movement that we are having within the city itself. This is also causing, and not very much spoken about, a dramatic reduction of forest reserve and its ability to absorb water runoff. And we talk about runoff, and I know in the previous keynote we spoke about it briefly. I was really excited to hear that they are containing the water in the land itself. The problem is to actually find a way that the land just doesn't contain it for flooding, but uses it for freshwater reserve, because US is losing freshwater reserve very quickly. And it's also creating a huge impact in the way the city's overall growth can take place. Now, Michigan is there. This is a huge freshwater reserve for Chicago, so that's very useful for them, right? But look at the fact that this is the actual tree cover or green forest region that's existing now around Chicago. Google Maps actually fakes a lot of things, if I can say that. And that's because Google Maps, and I'm saying it on video here, but Google Maps shows us a lot of green and blues that are not really that green and blue. So if you look at Landsat data and data from satellite mapping, you can actually identify that these are agricultural pieces of land, which may not necessarily be containing the same amount of forest reserve that you need to create better balance between the city growth and the natural resources or natural reserve we have. This is the condition of water in the region. If you look at the blue map, that's all areas that have slowly started getting freshwater reserve from Lake Michigan. And the brown areas, or the somewhat brown and orange areas, are actually groundwater that's coming out of the local aquifer. Aquifer water is dramatically getting reduced in the United States. There are much higher numbers for this out there that tell us that within 10 to 20 years, we are going to face dire water problems within the country because of the large use of groundwater tables that we are utilizing. So why is all of this important when you're doing a design for a city? And how can we, when we talk about traditional or classical architecture, respond to something like this? The answer lies in our past. We already had solved it, but we are not utilizing it in the same way as we continue to develop. The part that I think is important to understand, as we all know, Paris has very high density. But at some point, Paris's density can be very congested. And this is the part that people get nervous or concerned about. But Chicago, the traditional part of Chicago, this is, for example, Oak Park area, also has beautiful townhouse types that are individually owned or are 2-flat, 3-flat types that have been beautifully located, well-placed, and have very good density levels in them. These, when you compare that with the ratio or the way in which we lay our cities, interesting enough, you can see the diagram that it's up top, where you can see a 4-story building that occupies the full footprint, or that is of a tower that's 20 stories. They have the same square footage that they are giving. It's only that it is divided in a different way. And if we can understand that, then actually our 4 to 6-story buildings and cities are much more dense than some of the tallest densities we are identifying in different places, including Chicago. Chicago has its core at very high skyscraper levels, but the density is not being achieved there. Surprisingly, the density is achieved in the smaller fabric of the city of Chicago. And this is the key part that we should actually talk about. I think we differ away from talking about density per square mile because we see the concern around it, but the reality is, after finding out in different studies, these are the largest and most dense areas that we can find. Here is an example of the 2-flat and 3-flats I was talking about. Very small footprint, maximum of 14 to 20 feet, and they're close and tightly knit and create the best densities in Chicago. And you can say similar farms in New Orleans that provide a similar size. There's a whole aspect about, setbacks. There's a whole aspect of ground and lot division, the ratio of the block, all of these that make a huge difference. But there are many good examples across the United States that can serve as a great way to understand how to create better densities within our framework that is very simple to achieve. You do not need to go more than 6 stories to achieve 25,000 people per square mile. That makes a huge impact in the city of Chicago's relation. I do have some more diagrams that did not find their way today in, so if anybody is interested to find out further about this, I would suggest for creating good future density solutions, first of all, it needs to be missing middle, zero or reduced setback, classical traditional buildings that generate walkability. We all know this. This is not new information. Leading to create reduced footprint of the city by up to 50% or more, which is a dramatic number when we compare to what we have today. But the biggest thing that we do not include in much of our conversations is to create a green forest reserve that essentially acts as an edge, an urban edge from further development of many of these cities of the scale that we are producing today, so that they act as neighborhoods more than large cities. A city of 5 miles can occupy up to 500,000 people if done well and designed well. And that is a great number, and there are many examples of this in Europe that we are aware of, including cities that are very well green and spacious in nature. I'm going to go quickly to Leon Creer's sketches that he designed and talked about a long time ago about this, which is about creating multiple centers instead of trying to create one center, and the idea of the garden city where the garden was located. In our urban planning today, we do not locate where agriculture is to be stated, which means that agriculture actually goes on the periphery and the forest land is the one that gets most impacted. If agriculture can be located within the framework of the intermediate areas between some of these high density nodes that can be created, we can actually create a much better forest edge that can help support no further urban sprawl from taking place. Finally, I would say, as we grow, one of the principal concerns we have seen in the last 100 years is we have become a place that is a human-centric environment where humans are constantly taking from nature instead of giving back to nature. How can we change the way we are planning and designing such that we give back to nature in the next few decades instead of taking from it all the time? My hope is that my next speakers are going to help us understand that equation, not just with the urban, but the intent of the suburban being more of a town, and the intent of the rural, and high-speed connectivity between these, such that these are 15 to 20-minute circuits alone, and not too big of cities that create more problems than help. Thank you. I'm going to suggest Peter to come join.
Well, that's a daunting introduction. Thank you very much. So, Peter Talty, Vice President of Belvedere Property Management and board member of ICAA. And I'm going to talk about the town and specifically Taos Ski Valley. Let me just figure this out, which is a project we've been working on for the past 10 years. Let me begin by going back a bit in history here. The history of any ski area is unique, and Taos Ski Valley epitomizes the type of individuals whose vision, determination, and some might argue foolishness made it all happen. We purchased Taos Ski Valley from the Blake family, which is the founding family of the resort. Ernie Blake, shown in the upper right-hand corner, was Swiss-German, immigrated to the United States in 1938, member of the 10th Mountain Division during World War II, and settled in Santa Fe after the war. He founded Taos Ski Valley in 1955, and one of his first, or two of his first employees were the Maillet brothers, Jean and Dadu Maillet, who were formerly of the French national ski team and respectively founded the Hotel St. Bernard and the Edelweiss Hotel. Northern New Mexico is an intersection of many cultures. The Taos Pueblo has been located on their lands for over 1,000 years and is designated as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. The resident Hispanic population is descended from Spanish ancestry and date back over 15 generations in the Taos area. And with this as a backdrop, Ernie Blake and the Maillet brothers' intent was to establish a European ski area in a location in which many still struggle to understand if it even snows. Foolishness made this happen. So Taos Ski Valley, known as Taos, has always been a skier's mountain, with over 3,000 vertical feet of elevation extending from the base area at 9,200 feet to Kachina Peak, which, let me see if I can navigate this, to Kachina Peak at 12,400. From a planning standpoint, the constant challenge is dealing with steep grades and changes in elevation, and there are few conditions in which there's a level condition within the ski valley. The ski valley is located 20 miles north of the town of Taos, and it's about 2,000 acres of private holdings that is surrounded by the Carson National Forest and designated national wilderness. Of that 2,000 acres, there may be 100 acres of developable land. The remainder is over 60% grade. There are two principal drainages in the ski valley, the Lake Fork coming down here and the South Fork, right here, which coincide at the core village and then creating the Rio Hondo, which in turn drains to the Rio Grande. The cardinal aspect is predominantly north-facing, and that coupled with elevation secures snow throughout the winter. The village is comprised of three nodes: Amazet, which is the entry area to the ski valley, right here. The core village, which is the base area for the ski village, and Kachina Basin, which is the threshold to the wilderness and the surrounding wilderness beyond. Today's focus will be on the core village, which is the heart of the ski operation and the hospitality offering. Taos was acquired in 2014, and this aerial shows what the core village looked like at the time of purchase. There was no organized plan for development or circulation, and little rhyme or reason as to how buildings occurred. If there was any rationale, it was to orient buildings towards the ski slope. Sutton Road, which was the main artery, so Sutton Road, which is this road right here, that was the main entrance to the ski valley, and the skier drop-off, which dealt with all day skiers, and that's how you actually entered the ski area, was located some 30 feet below the base of Lift 1, which is located right here. So your circulation was then through this maze of buildings, which is multiple layers. You had no sense of arrival, no sense of destination. Signage was a key element, and in many respects, it just was remarkably awkward, to say the least. The Rio Hondo stream, which is the predominant water body, you could hardly even tell where that is right now. That's running right down through here. And it was completely overgrown, mostly non-existent, and if anything, separated the two parts of the village, which is Sutton Place, I just showed you that, from Thunderbird Road, which is somewhat of more the residential area over here. Pedestrian access and circulation was limited to existing roads, all of which brought a new meaning to there is no there. In 2014, we worked with Design Workshop and their Aspen office under Richard Shaw. We began the analysis of the core village with solar studies, walkability, connectivity to the stream, ski frontage, and views. Key areas of focus are the drop-off, which just keep this area in mind right here. Oops. Right here, and this intense yellow area right there. So the gradations are just different levels of value as far as, and not value from a real estate standpoint, but value as far as the connectivity of those separate elements that we talked about. Parallel to these studies, we worked with the village of Taos Ski Valley to establish a core village zone as an overlay district within the existing zoning ordinance, which was predominantly geared towards residential development. The core village zone allowed greater density, height limitations of 4 stories, lessened setback requirements from property lines. Curtis and Wyndham worked closely with us in the development of these design guidelines. The framework concept, which has been developed as a consequence of this, captures the main planning principles that inform the design process. If there was a back-of-the-envelope sketch, it was the confirmation that this drop-off right here in grade, again, constant challenge in the ski valley is grade. This drop-off right here, which was in the public portion of the parking area, this is Forest Service land, is only about 4 feet difference in elevation from the ski beach. So the concept of linking this was a key element, and this is that's Richard Shaw in Design Workshop, and that actually is the back-of-the-envelope sketch that we had. The difference in elevation, the corridor that was then established became the principal north-south pedestrian access for the resort. It became the armature for future development and the streetscape for retail operations. It also shifted the center of gravity to what we call Thunderbird Road, which is right along here, and as a consequence, expanded the village core as we began to link both the Thunderbird Road side as well as the Sutton Road side. A pedestrian bridge right here connected these 2 parts of the village and created a coherent pedestrian corridor. The restoration of the Rio Hondo stream, which is running right down through here, complemented that north-south pedestrian access as it initially opened a network of trails running along the edge of the restored stream. This in turn developed an east-west axis which allowed better linkage to our children's center, which is a ski center down here. This was subsequently expanded to include now a village administrative center, or village administrative core comprised of an urgent care facility, we call it Mogul Medical, firehouse and EMS, U.S. Post Office, all of which surround the existing village administrative offices. A fixed grip pulse gondola, which is this element right here, links this new center, this village center, with the village core. And it is exclusively a people mover, thus avoiding car traffic. In fact, there's very little car movement in the core village. Our plans are to expand this same concept with what is now called a detachable gondola, which will link the core village up to Kachina, which we saw previously. This rendering by Hart Howerton captures the pedestrian access which begins along Thunderbird Road, which was right here, crosses the lower plaza, which now has a skating rink, sort of a concierge sales service right here, pedestrian bridge, the Blake Hotel, to the upper plaza, to what is now under construction, the new Hotel St. Bernard and the base of Lift 1. This aerial photograph brings reality to concept. This is, so the same elements that are sitting here. So Thunderbird Road, this whole edge is animated. There's a grocery store on that corner right there, sort of a curios store, a bar in the corner right there, jewelry store over here, pedestrian bridge. This is the Blake Hotel. That's the entrance to the restaurant, 192. We'll see another photograph of that. Coming across to the upper plaza, this is the Hotel St. Bernard coming out of the ground. This was shot about a month ago, base of Lift 1. So all of this now is created a pedestrian, that is the pedestrian corridor that's been created. This building right here, which is the Lake Fork building, is multi-purpose. We have ticket sales, concierge service, as upper floors are office or conference rooms. We completed the Blake Hotel which is this building right here, in 2017, which created the ski beach and base area. Now, at that point, we had no connection here, so you still had to meander through here, but it began to establish this plaza, which really did create a center, the first real center within the village. The Blake Hotel was designed by Zarin Associates with support from Fairfax and Sammons. It's an 80-key hotel, 9 penthouse condominium units. The Blake established for us proof of concept and gave us confidence to move forward. The Blake residence, right here, and the pedestrian bridge were completed in 2021, and this really created the village, as it were. The lower plaza comprised of winter season skating rink, ticket and concierge service, retail frontage along the pedestrian corridor. This project was designed by Hart Howerton and is a 24-unit condominium. We broke ground this spring on the Hotel St. Bernard, a 60-key hotel accompanied by for sale product, which will be over on this edge here in the adjacent chalets. Hart Howerton is also the lead designer on this project. The ski beach and base area of Lift 1 Resort Center are the hub of skier activity. Individual shots, this is Sutton Place now. The Blake Hotel located along Sutton Place across from what is now the Edelweiss condominiums, had been the Edelweiss Hotel. Sits comfortably within the existing building masses as we've taken advantage of grade challenges and positioned the entrance as a feature along Sutton Road. Looking from the upper plaza towards the pedestrian bridge, this is the entrance to the restaurant 192 right here. This is the pedestrian bridge down there. On what is the existing resort center, we've also built out a retail component, so that just enlivens the pedestrian experience as you're going along this edge. This is leading back to the lower plaza where the skating rink is located. A lot of the effort in, this is the restored Rio Hondo, which, again, it's hard to even describe what this looked like before. It was what would be viewed as a channelized stream. No one really even knew there was water going through the village. So this has all been restored as a viable waterway and allowed the creation of walkways along either side. So it's a pedestrian connectivity that's running all along the edge of that stream. Again, a good example of how we had to deal with grade. The lower portion of the Blake Hotel, I mean, that's the pedestrian bridge right there. So all of this is built below, effectively below grade. There's parking below this area and stuff like that. This was the area where the drop-off had historically been. This is the lower plaza. One of the big components you're always trying to do the Taos Ski area was a ski area. So our effort is try to change this into a multi-season resort. This is the skating rink, which gets utilized in the summers as a recreational feature. It's, in the evenings, they convert this into a movie theater. It's really a fun experience unto itself. That's the Blake residence as backdrop. These are the retail stores along that edge. This is that same, now this is the skating rink as such. In the winter, looking at the Lake Fork building, again, ticket sales, concierge service. That's the walkway that go back through. That's the mountain, obviously, behind us there. On the right-hand side is the Blake residence. Same view, but the backdrop of the Blake residence. This is all the retail experience coming along the edge. The grocery store, curios. There's a bar in there, and jewelry store right there. The ski beach, base 1, lower plaza, Hotel St. Bernard. I think scale-wise, this is set a standard. It is also, we're drawn back a little bit. You can see where that entrance is to the Blake Hotel, the 192, the restaurant. This is all the pedestrian corridor that's created around there. A ski area is a unique opportunity, to say the least. The resident year-round population is about 150 individuals, but during the ski season, we grow to 275,000 skiers utilizing the mountain, and in a given day, there's over 4,000 enjoying the resort. So it's very much a slinky. As far as you build for maximum events, and things grow accordingly. Creating a pedestrian experience has been a key driver of all of our planning. We've been able to leverage lift infrastructure to that end and utilize the gondola system as a people mover, using the core village as a center for access up and down the mountain. Water remains a limited and regulated resource for all of our development, and we have to conform to very prescribed limits on the amount of water that's used. I like to think foolishness continues to drive the interest in what we're doing there, but I do also think we have developed systems that are applicable to other development areas. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen James. I'm the Chief Visioning Officer for a family office called Larry H. Miller Company. They were the former owners of the Utah Jazz and built their fortune in automotive sales. And since then, they thought, well, maybe we ought to give this up. The organization's vision and purpose is to enrich lives, and it's been a wonderful experience working with them as they've transformed their business. Now they're diversifying into real estate as a way of recognizing impact on communities and changing. So I'm pleased to be with you today and to share some thoughts on some work that we're doing, and it mostly reflects Cryptali's presentation about sort of the city and where it's headed. And I'm going to speak to this because and I'm speaking about the village, the rural scale, and how it's sort of consumed by development. Let me see if I can figure this out. So my thoughts are on this little town. It's a little dairy farming community in Utah called Hoytsville. And we're trying to figure out how to help this community cultivate into a town. And part of the reason for that is that a number of Hoytsville dairy farmers recognized that their dairy business was no longer sustainable. They could not compete in the market with industrial scale dairies, and so they've recently sold all their cattle to these dairies, and now they recognize that there's no sustainable industry within the community. And so the question is, how do you actually create sustainable growth in a rural setting on the fringe so these people don't have to commute for hours and miles? And how do they maintain the heritage of their community? So you can see on the bottom right there is Hoytsville, but there's a lot of growth pressure from Park City, another ski town, right, where there's this sort of Me Too resort town sprawl that's happening. And they want to maintain their identity. They see some of what's happening in this sort of large scale or urbanization of this resort town of Park City that's creating problems for traffic and access. There's also great demand for workforce housing in this setting because the real estate property values are way too high. How do they continue to live in this place that their pioneer ancestors created 200 years ago? So it's really an interesting challenge, but it's been a very engaging assignment. The scale and slow pace of development that we're pursuing in this context at Hoytsville is in stark contrast to the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years, and I want to sort of give you a sense of what that work is too, because it speaks specifically to what Cryptali was talking about. Many of you, or maybe some of you, have heard of the community called Daybreak. There I've been trying to figure out how to insert human scale design and placemaking into what is otherwise an industrial scale of growth. Daybreak, that little red outline, is over 4,000 acres. And it's a mixed use community that anchors what we call the southwest quadrant of Salt Lake Valley. You can see its proximity to that mine there, the Kennecott copper mine. This was old mining land that the mining company offered up as a test bed or laboratory for growth, for smart growth about 20 years ago. And so this was a brownfield site that we have then cleaned up and reclaimed. And the big idea here was, how do we use this land, this 4,200 acres, and try to apply a density per mile that gets us up in the teens again? And I just did the calculation when Kriptali was speaking, and we're at about 9,000 residents per mile. So it's a step up. It's a significant step up in this context. But we are really treating it like a laboratory because this market hasn't developed this way in 150 years. And so we have been just testing and iterating and studying how to do it within that sort of flow of residential growth and demand in this market. You know, this valley is known for its sweeping vistas. It's the Great Basin. You know, you can see for 100 miles here because you get up on these hillsides and look out over these desert valleys. And as a result of the mountains, the quality of growth has not been great. And I think it's because people that live here have the ability to just sort of lift their eyes above the growth and see the just spectacular granite peaks in the Wasatch Range. And it's sort of satisfied for many. You know, we all that live there look to the mountains. It's where we go to recreate, where we go to sort of, you know, recover from the daily grind, whether it's camping, hiking, fishing, skiing, you know, mountain biking, all the above. So the mountains are our source. And this development wouldn't exist. The pioneers, the Mormon pioneers heading west in 1847 wouldn't have stopped here if it hadn't have been for the mountain streams flowing out of these beautiful cliffs. Daybreak was also meant to introduce a cultural and you know, business centers you know, in this valley because historical cores hadn't actually been built in 150 years. So the experience of developing here has been, it's just like spreading peanut butter over a slice of bread. You know, it was just contiguous growth and no end to the community. The whole valley was essentially seen as a growth constraint, a growth ring around this area. But we've begun a process of, we have an entitlement for 20,000 units on this land. And when we began developing this community, there wasn't an attached product or a small lot product that had been delivered there or built there in 40 years. And so when I talk about a laboratory for growth, you know, it really is. And so we're developing on the floor at kind of a 5 units per acre density, and at the high end, a 50 unit per gross density. So there's no reason why we couldn't do a 200, 400 unit, you know, building. There's no height limit here. It's simply what can we flex the community to achieve and accomplish. So that's what we're doing. A little more context. You know, it is a light rail or transit anchored community. So in a sense, it's like a streetcar suburb of Salt Lake City. It's about 40 miles out of town. And these are an example of some of the places that we begin to pepper into this sort of multi-centered concept plan that Peter Calthorpe helped us envision back in about 2001. But the plan itself has been dynamic, and we've had other wonderful consultants such as UDA participate in this process over time. The vision and the idea being, how do we really create places and sites for beautiful architecture so they can work together on a street, so they can begin to create place and community in this part of the world. So here's an example of what we're actually working toward now. We're beginning our first phase of a 600-acre urban center. I mean, imagine that. So the idea is that we create balance, a bit of the other end of the dumbbell to Salt Lake City in this valley, because all roads lead to Salt Lake City and the infrastructure's failing. People spend too much time in traffic. The quality of life is eroding as this growth happens. It's been a sort of drive till you qualify approach to housing, and we've recognized long ago that we needed to provide a new center as a way to sort of capture some of these trips, distribute jobs in a constellation of centers around the valley that can help the valley then work and function again as a system. And just a few weeks ago, as an anchor to this new urban center that we're developing, we just announced a new AAA minor league ball club, which is the affiliate to the Los Angeles Angels, which is kind of exciting, while we also study and work on Major League Utah, which would bring Major League Baseball to downtown. So we're starting to think about the region from a systems approach, and that's part of the reason why we were invited to help solve this problem in this small town. But I just wanted to give you a little sense of how growth has occurred in the last 40 years. So Kriptal had mentioned a doubling in growth essentially in the last 50 years. Well, we've doubled it in 40. So this, you can see the growth right along the base of the mountains on the east. Those red blotches are the historical cores of some of these old pioneering towns, Salt Lake City up there on the north. And then where Daybreak is down by that mine, you can see not too long ago was just all farming land. And check this out. That's what it looks like today. So when I talk about the industrialization of growth, that's really what's happening. Matter of fact, when we look at our community itself, which is noted here in that blue line, there were times where we were absorbing over 1,000 homes a year. So that's enough work to keep dozens of town architects busy. Believe me, it's been absolutely insane. But how do you move the needle in that type of setting? And I say architects can make a world of difference, because one of the advantages that we've had in developing here is we haven't had the same NIMBY effect that most of the projects are plagued by. Because people say, oh, you want density, put it in Daybreak. You want density, put it in Daybreak. Because we've sort of figured out how to sort of transition through the transects. We've been learning from what we hear professionals like you and the CNU saying. And so we've been beginning to figure out how to apply these concepts as we experiment in our laboratory. So when you look at the communities on the right, let's just compare these again. Look at what's happening on the right side of the mountains. We call that the Wasatch Back. You can see these old rural farming communities. Look what's happening now. So that same movement into this beautiful, pristine, high mountain sort of farmlands is becoming overrun by people now, who have noticed Utah and are after second homes, and so much of the homes that are filling that area are empty. We have a huge housing shortage, of 50,000 unit shortfall in our market right now, and we cannot deliver housing fast enough, and much of the housing that we're delivering stands empty most of the time. So that's the framework for this conversation, or the starting point for this conversation for that little area on the upper right. What do we do to help keep that area from being consumed by this inertia, this growth inertia? I mean, as we know, and I thank Eric for these little sketches. I can't sketch quite like this, but he has a way with the pen, which is really, kind of fun. So the question at hand is whether Hoytsville and small rural communities like it can be evolved or grown in a manner that creates new value and preserves the memory of these places, as well as some of the open lands that separate them. And rather than a preservation-only approach on this land, which isn't going to get much support in the state of Utah, how do we use growth to actually create these opportunities? How do we continue this sort of laboratory-like thinking? Can demand become the mechanism for creating a new type of flourishing and vibrant populated centers in communities, and not default to rural suburbanization? We know what happens. Let's see, let me flip through these again. When growth starts heading your way, the mini mart and the convenience store starts to show up on the corner in the path of growth, and eventually the streets begin to get widened, and it begins to unfold this series of events that really changes the complexion of place forever. You begin to lose, these farms, and then eventually you've sort of lost what was special about this place. And then when this happens, the people that moved in get upset when more people move in because they've created a place that they no longer value, and then fear becomes the motivating force for this challenge to growth, which ultimately is a catalyst for continued sprawl in other places. So it's just a process of scattering trouble across the land. So we're trying to figure out how not to do that. And we were brought in by these families and Summit County to look at this specifically. So this is a vision diagram of this little community that the community put together. And they asked us, because we're viewed as problem solvers in this space, what would you do with this? And one of the challenges that we have is this represents the study area, and you can see they want to create these centers, these nodes, but these are the landowners where the diagram remains who have opted into this system of this overlay, and then this is the land that has been conveyed to us as a team to begin to seed this idea. So you can see we have this really complex sort of patchwork of land that we need to use in order to even generate this plan. So we think of the plan more as a system of working, a way of working, rather than very specific lines on the plan, or lines on the land. And we treated Daybreak like this. Daybreak was a series of principles with levers that we would pull as we learned and as the path of growth shifted. So what we're striving for here is a very flexible entitlement that says, yeah, roughly we could accommodate 5,000 units in a place like this, but let us show you how in time instead of directly. And here's an example that I want to show you that we worked with UDA and their team. This is an example of a piece of land that we own. A lot of it's was cultivated for food stock for the dairy cows, which are no longer there. We know that if you just let this go to open space at this point, that it will be a pretty ratty landscape. So we're trying to think about how do we actually transition the nature of these open spaces so that we don't ruin the community in the interim. The worst thing we could do is scrape the ground and lay down 500 lots in a single plat. But what we're trying to do is figure out how do you sort of tuck in these sort of small cluster of neighborhoods that actually work with the existing housing stock. One of the things that's a real challenge here is the housing stock is an interesting blend of 1950s ranch houses as well as early pioneer houses that have been built over the course of 150 years. And if we come in right away and say, boom, here's the new vision for this place, we're going to offend the entire population of the town. So we've got this issue where there is no front, there is no back, there is total exposure. We can't back or nestle into a glade of trees. We're out in the open. And we have to figure out how to understand, well, how might this town have actually grown had there been a catalyst for growth 50 years ago, and begin to drop in a diverse sort of set of building scales, a single-family home, townhome, duplex, what we're calling the agri-vern building, which might be representative of, flats in a barn, where we can start to provide affordable housing at a high-density scale for the workforce housing shortage, but also provide small homes and cottages that this small linear farming community can begin to grow into. So our thinking right now is that what would be logical is that we begin to introduce a series of buildings that form a heart to this place where the fruit or the vegetables that are being cultivated could actually come to market in a place like this. Creating, a place for commerce, even community gardens, or even that picturesque there that helps establish, the potential future for this place. And a coffee shop and a small market to get a bite to eat. So these people have to travel for miles to get this right now. Uses like this used to exist about 20 years ago, but have since gone out of business. So it's the addition of population that would allow this to thrive. And then we also have to think about, am I running low on time? Okay, 5 more minutes. Have to think about, well, how do we, the people that move into this place or that haven't opted in, can we expand and think about what would the community growth look like if they decided to participate in the community? But we have to make it work whether they choose to or not. So here's some examples of what that might look like. Here's what we have now. Here we're leaving corridors that allow us to drive cattle through it still so that the farming operations can stay. So we're lacing over the land essentially a series of streets that don't prevent access to farming. We're looking at gravel roads with grass strips down the middle and painting a picture for what the community could look like in the future. Here are some of the precedents that we're drawing on and some of the places that we're working with the community to create. So we are trying to capture their vision for this place and make sure at the end that we're bringing an end to this town, that we're tapering towards the hills and the meadows and leaving the ring of open space that makes this episodic, distinct place within this mountain river valley. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think we have a minute or so for maybe a few questions. David.
I wonder, other than some like beneficent private funder, what is the role of policy of government in promoting this sort of smart growth? Like, how do we do it except hoping that out of the goodness of our hearts, some billionaire says, I want to build a beautiful small community?
Yeah, that's a good question, and actually I want to pass that to Stephen. One of the things we've been honored to work on this, but one thing I would say that is that this is and just being involved with this a little bit is that there's incredible coordination between a really sophisticated and group that has a vision, a series of owners that also had a vision, and then you've also got collaboration with the county government. So there's a whole series of coordination items. Stephen, what kind of models or what kinds of things could other municipalities and groups learn from this, and how could they start to take this into answering the questions that David has?
It's the trust that's been built slowly over time has enabled the flexibility in the policy. I think cities have been burned, and I don't know that you can just sweep in and change policy without the trust. So it's something that has to be cultivated over years. I wish there were an easy answer. I mean, we struggle with this now as we begin to go into other towns. We forget, we don't have the same trust here yet. So we have to take a long view and begin small. And incrementally. You can't just sweep in and, translate the point of view of the whole community.
Yes.
Hey to you, Susan. What about, instead of always doing things on a grid and that, I remember there's Poundbury in England, where you actually talk about putting people into a circle and then keeping this band around the town of wide open space so that each individual home might have its own little garden, something, kind of like Charleston, where you can go down these alleys, and then all the homes have these beautiful long views, and maybe the views of your mountains and that. And so you're taking that public space and making like a donut. I don't know. Do people think like that?
That's an outstanding question, and one of the questions of today. What's interesting about today, and I'll just take a moment, is that a lot of times a lot of the very pristine landscape is no longer available, so sometimes people are starting to develop in infill locations and having to think much more strategically about areas that are maybe characteristics about the land, but then they're also, in some cases, being very much smarter about growth. We're actually very lucky to be working in a town outside of Atlanta that is actually, I don't know if you're familiar with transfer development rights, which is something that happens in New York. The reason why there's a lot of low buildings in New York is sometimes they sell the air rights over their building to another building, which creates a tall building, but that allows for that small building to remain. They're actually doing the same principle for for smaller scale properties, in that you actually get an even amount of density, which is what Stephen was talking about, the peanut butter, but they actually require you to transfer it into a small hamlet, which can go to allowing, sometimes instead of maximizing it onto your property lines, which are usually on straight lines, but to actually create much better shapes. And then also this idea of pristine landscape and then higher density, much more engaging development as well. So Kripala, do you have anything you want to add to that as well? I know you've been dealing with some of those kinds of issues as well in some of
So
your
I think,
discussions.
first of all, we almost forget that regional planning has a role to play in things that we do in a city or a town or urban area. There are ways in which, through policy or through planning of some of these, you can identify and demarcate locations much earlier, 40, 50 years earlier, that say and predict this is what the growth can be. So when developers come in, they're actually responding to what has been identified. The sad part is in the last 40 or 50 years, these type of design solutions haven't been the best. And so that has created that negative input where we are actually expecting developers to take the load of making that transformation. It actually should come from the city or the town and from the regional thought process for it. And that loss has been what has been now coming from a grassroots level, making it happen. Something where you are actually creating big parameters of land for agricultural purposes or forest reserve has to happen at a scale where various, even to the level of the state, are involved.
I think unfortunately we're out of time, but I know that our speakers are still going to be around for the remainder of the conference, so if you have additional questions, we'll be here. I want to take just a moment to thank all of you for coming to this session, but I also want to thank the ICAA staff for all their hard work through this session and putting this together. So thank you, everybody. Thanks.